Hey guys, welcome back. If you're new here, hi, my name is Jessica and welcome to my channel where I explore new dark and creepy topics each week. Except for last week, I missed class last week. I was sick and just did not feel up to filming. But the week before that, I talked about Brittany Wood's disappearance and how her family is a complete dumpster fire. If you have a strong stomach and you'd like to learn why, I will make sure to have that video linked up here in the card for you. And if you just have an interest in the macabre in general and you'd like to join me back here each week, go ahead and subscribe to my channel down below. I am sorry that I missed last week and that I couldn't let you guys know that there wouldn't be a new video or what was going on. I don't have the little community tab yet. 700 more people want to subscribe before the next time I need to miss an upload. That'd be great. But in all seriousness, before we hop into today's video, I do want to put a content warning right here that today's story focuses heavily on child abuse and neglect and also involves suicide. So if that is not something that you're in the headspace to hear about right now, I completely understand and I urge you to click off this video. I'm sure I'll see you back here soon for a different one. And with all that being said, let's go ahead and get into today's story. Today, I'm going to be telling you the story of a little girl who was known largely to the world as Genie, or the Feral Child. Genie Wiley was born April 18th, 1957 in Arcadia, California, to her parents Clark Wiley and Irene Oglesby. Now, to fully understand the family dynamic here, we're going to have to get a little backstory on Papa Wiley. Clark Wiley was born in the early 1900s and grew up in foster homes and brothels all throughout the Pacific Northwest. He had a very chaotic and unstable childhood, which translated into a really toxic and dysfunctional relationship with his mother. Yeah, mommy issues. As a young adult, he took a job working on an aircraft assembly line in LA, which he maintained during and after World War II. From there, he met Irene, who was actually 20 years younger than him, having been born in 1921. The two eventually got married, but it was a fucking nightmare. Clark was extremely controlling, and he hated basically everything. He hated noise, he hated light, and most of all, he hated children. He was adamant that he did not want children, ever, under any circumstances. So they had 4, the first being a little girl who died after being left in the garage to freeze to death, their second who died from birth complications, and their third and fourth who did survive. A boy who they named John, followed 5 years later by Genie. Now, as if shit doesn't sound horrible enough already, in 1958, when Genie was about 1, Clark's mother actually died after being struck by a drunk driver. Obviously, this would be completely devastating to anyone, but to Clark, it was beyond devastating. The man full-on snapped. He began savagely beating his son John, and also came to the conclusion that Genie, 1-year-old Genie, was useless. In fact, at just 1-year-old, he decided that he could tell that she would never contribute anything useful to society. So he locked her in a dark bedroom at the back of their house and forbid his son and wife from having any contact with her. For 24 hours a day, Genie was either strapped to a child's toilet or restrained in a homemade straitjacket in her crib. She wasn't allowed to cry or even to make a sound. These rules are obviously ridiculous to impose on a toddler, but John enforced them harshly nonetheless. He would beat her with a piece of wood or his bare hands if she ever dared to make her presence known. He would also try to scare her by barking and growling at her like a dog, just because. This man was sick, twisted, and deranged. My God, he was awful. And poor Genie endured this abuse for over a decade. She literally sat locked in a crib for 13 years. And when I say locked in a crib, I don't mean locked in a room in a crib. I mean they rigged a piece of chicken wire over the crib and tied it down to lock her in it. She was trapped in a crib in a pitch black room 24 hours a day with no socialization or human interaction. If you're anything like me at this point, you're wondering how Irene could possibly let this happen to her daughter, but she was legally blind due to severe cataracts and also severely abused by Clark. So she basically let him do whatever he wanted to the children in hopes that it would keep him from turning his psychosis on her. Finally, though, in 1970, she had had enough, and when Clark left the house to go to the grocery store one day, she rounded up the kids and took off to her mom's house. But it wasn't until she walked into the social services office in Temple City, California, that everything really changed. Irene was there that day simply hoping to obtain financial assistance for her vision issues. So she took Genie with her and waltzed her happy ass right in as if everything was totally normal. But much to Irene's surprise, the people working in the office could immediately tell that something was not right here. For starters, at this point, Genie was about 14, but had the physical stature of an 8-year-old. She couldn't talk, she was drooling and spitting, she couldn't focus her eyes, she had extremely limited motor skills, and she was still wearing diapers. Thankfully, rather than assuming that Genie had mental deficits that caused these developmental delays, the employees at the Social Security office reported what they'd seen to authorities, who quickly launched an investigation into Genie's well-being. And they were appalled as they began to uncover the desolate circumstances that this poor, innocent little girl had been forced to live in. She had been kept in near constant isolation, with nothing to look forward to other than the tiny rays of sun that would break through the gaps in her curtains during the day. Neighbors of the Wiley family weren't even aware that they had a daughter, let alone that she was being neglected this way. Clark and Irene were both arrested for child abuse and taken to the Temple City Sheriff's Station for questioning. And they acted every bit as weird and just out there as you'd imagine. Irene didn't even mention the other members of her family in her interview, and Clark just refused to speak at all. He can act big and tough when he's up against a child, but put him in front of someone who might actually hold him accountable for being the shit stain on the underpants of society, and suddenly he's got nothing to say. I've only seen one snippet of this man speak, and he just seems so incredibly disconnected from reality and just life in general.
Mr. Wiley?
Yes.
Why did you keep your daughter in a room?
Mr. Wiley has no comment.
No comment.
We haven't had time to discuss the charges. We haven't even seen them.
Is it just me? Does he seem like he's just, not there? All I know is that Clark would never be formally held responsible for the havoc he wreaked on Genie's life, because shortly before his trial, he shot himself, leaving behind nothing but a note that read, quote, "The world will never understand," unquote. You are right about that, Clark. I think I can safely speak for the entire world when I say, we really don't. Genie was then removed from her mother's custody and placed in the custody of the state of California. She was sent to UCLA's Children's Hospital, where physicians described her as, quote, the most profoundly damaged child they'd ever seen, unquote. But what we see as an absolutely depressing nightmare, scientists saw as a golden opportunity.
We seized this wonderful opportunity that she provided us in as loving a way as we could, but using it to finally get our chance to address head-on specific hypotheses and notions about human language and the human mind.
According to what science was aware of up to this point, children could only process and take in and learn certain information at certain points in life. These timeframes are known as critical periods. And one of these critical periods is, you guessed it, language. According to scientific theories at the time, Genie had missed her opportunity to fluently learn and master any language. But what everyone was eager to put to the test was, had she actually? A team of scientists and doctors were awarded a grant to study the developmental consequences of extreme social isolation in hopes of answering that very question. This was a research project that they poured their hearts and souls into for 4 years. Susan Curtis, who we just saw the clip of and was one of the linguists assigned to study Genie, noted that, and I'm paraphrasing slightly here, her behavior was distasteful, but that she still captivated them with her beauty. And while that sounds kind of nice, I guess, the studies surrounding her were not all wholesome and wonderful. Genie was subjected to seemingly never-ending experiments, a lot of which some people argued were simply too much or too extreme for a child. But to those in charge of the study, Genie was a scientific specimen, not just a child. And I'm not gonna lie, some of the pictures give me serious 11 from Stranger Things vibes. She went from being neglected and unwanted to incredibly sought after in, I'm sure, what felt like the blink of an eye. And while the study was extreme and controversial at times, it did bring about information that scientists found surprising. Prior to Genie, it was largely believed that humans could not learn to communicate after puberty. But Genie's study proved that language could be learned, but that grammar and sentence structure was inexplicable past a certain point. So there is truly a finite amount of time at the beginning of one's life that they can truly master communication. So the answer is no. Genie will never be able to speak fluently the way that you or I are fortunate enough to. But she was able to learn to communicate effectively. And what really inspired researchers was that she obviously wanted to learn. And eventually she was able to construct simple phrases to express what she wanted or what she was thinking. But anything more sophisticated that required actual sentence structuring was simply outside of her realm of understanding. However, it's important not to misconstrue that with a lack of intelligence. Another quote from Susan Curtis regarding Genie's intelligence was, quote, "She could hold a set of pictures so they told a story. She could create all sorts of complex structures from sticks. She had other signs of intelligence." But even with this intelligence and her obvious desire to learn, the question still remained, could Genie ever really live a normal life? And the answer, unfortunately, is not really.
Her brain, her cortex, that has those neural systems responsible for speech and language, because she never heard any words and because she was never spoken to very often, they didn't get stimulated. And because they weren't stimulated, they got smaller and less functional and disconnected, and ultimately that part of the brain literally physically changes.
And on top of all of this, despite the groundbreaking scientific findings this group managed to spearhead, what they couldn't handle was their own toxicity. They were messy, constantly accusing one another of abusing their position and or their relationship with Genie. A big point of contention came about in 1971 when Jean Butler, one of Genie's language teachers, took her home for socialization. Things seemed to be going well until the whole household came down with rubella and had to quarantine. From that point on, Jean tried to prevent the other physicians and researchers from seeing Genie, claiming that they were putting her through too much. She even applied to be Genie's foster mom, which did not go over well. It ultimately led the team to accuse Jean of using Genie for her own gain. They insinuated that she was using Genie to try and become the next Anne Sullivan. Anne Sullivan, if you don't know, is the teacher who helped Helen Keller learn to communicate. Because of this apparent conflict of interest, Genie was eventually relocated to live with therapist David Rigler, which also seemed to go well at first. But once the funding for the study ended in 1975, Genie actually ended up back with her mother. Not just back with her mother. Get this. In the same house that this whole goddamn nightmare was hatched. I don't know who let that happen, but I do know they should be ashamed of themselves. Irene should have never been allowed back around that poor girl. Thankfully, the arrangement only lasted a few weeks. That was all the time it took for Irene to realize that she could not handle what she'd let happen to Genie. So Genie was returned to the custody of the state, where sadly her progress began to regress. And as far as anyone is aware, she has sadly never regained that progress. In 1979, Irene actually had the audacity to file a lawsuit against the hospital and Genie's caretakers, alleging that they were exploiting her for prestige and profit. As if her damn lawsuit wasn't for prestige and profit. Girl, we know you don't care about that child. Nevertheless, the lawsuit was settled in 1984, and from that point on, Genie's former caretakers, as well as the researchers from the study, were barred from speaking to her. And beyond that, there's really not much record of Genie. After the lawsuit, she was not allowed to be the subject of any more studies. Therefore, publicity faded, public interest faded, and Genie kind of slipped through the cracks. Susan Curtis has made many attempts to contact Genie over the years, but she's never successfully made it further than the social worker in charge of Genie's case. Genie's mom died in 2003, her brother died in 2011, and Genie herself seems to have disappeared into the system. I just hope that wherever she is, she's being well taken care of and that she's as happy as she possibly can be. She spent so much of her life being tortured and treated like a lab rat, so I just hope that she's living somewhat peacefully now. This story makes me so sad. I don't understand how anyone can treat anyone like this, let alone how someone can do this to their own innocent child. Ugh, it makes me sick. Let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. Have you ever heard of this story before? I don't see it talked about a lot, and when I heard it, I just could not get past it. I know this video is short, but I just felt like I had to talk about it. As always, thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video and to listen to Genie's story. If you haven't already and you'd like to, go ahead and subscribe to my channel down below. I put out new dark and creepy content each week, and I would love to see you back here in my next video. Until then, stay safe and have a good week. Oh, and fuck Clark Wiley, right? Bye, guys.